In the late months of 1962, in the semi-arid uplands of central Namibia, Dr. Karl Heinrich Weiss, a 43-year-old geophysicist formerly attached to the Federal Institute for Geosciences in Hanover, became the subject of a classified inquiry whose details were never formally released. The inquiry originated from fragmentary correspondence between German technical advisors working under a bilateral resource development agreement and representatives of a South African Geological Survey mission. Records suggest that the material circumstances surrounding Weiss's discovery were initially geological and non-strategic in nature. However, the surviving summaries imply that, within several weeks, the findings were reclassified under defense oversight due to the presence of anomalous subterranean installations inconsistent with known colonial or wartime infrastructure. According to the earliest surviving memorandum, dated December 17, 1962, Weiss and two assistants, identified in marginal notation as V. Kruger and L. Adebayo, were conducting seismic sounding operations approximately 40 kilometers east of the abandoned settlement of Ajitsuo. Their objective, as defined by Contract No. K-14 of 62 between the Federal Institute and the Southwest Africa Administration, was to assess subsurface mineral continuity in Precambrian strata. On the morning of December 12, anomalous resonance readings were registered on portable equipment, a sequence of low-frequency returns inconsistent with geological reflection. The equipment log, reconstructed from carbon copies recovered in 1971, recorded periodic oscillation at uniform amplitude, metallic interference probable. Subsequent entries indicate that the team relocated the following day and repeated the measurements with identical results. On December 14, Weiss authorized limited excavation at coordinates later redacted in the surviving file. At a depth of 3.8 meters, the group exposed corroded metallic plates arranged in hexagonal alignment. The plates exhibited standardized boring consistent with early 20th century engineering but showed no manufacturer markings. Weiss's field report, translated from the original German, noted the material is non-ferrous, moderately magnetic, and resonates under inductive probe as if sustaining residual current. The phrasing, resonates under inductive probe, recurs in three later memoranda and appears to have formed the basis of the subsequent codename, Null Horizon, first applied in a Pretoria-dated cable on January 3, 1963. The existence of the installation was confirmed by an inspection party dispatched under cover of a hydrosurvey. Officially, the mission was designated Section B, Field Correlation. Personnel lists are incomplete. Surviving documents name Captain J. Botha of the South African Corps of Engineers and one civilian observer identified only as Foreign Consultant W. Later German summaries associate this with Dr. Weiss. The team excavated to 7.2 meters and exposed a sealed access corridor reinforced by riveted metallic beams. Interior air samples reportedly contain trace ozone concentration exceeding ambient levels by a factor of 4. A translated laboratory note adds that temperature within the cavity remained constant at 12.6 degrees Celsius despite external variance. By late January 1963, all field work had ceased. An internal telex from the Department of Mines, reference DM 43/63, instructed Pretoria liaison officers to restrict dissemination of the Ajitsuo findings to existing joint defense channels only. The same communication included the phrase "energy cores intact, under guard," later underlined in red pencil by an unidentified reviewer. The subsequent phase of documentation, 1963 to 1965, survives only in fragmentary translation copies maintained in East Berlin under File R. 281/65, evidently obtained through an intermediary in Windhoek. These papers were later integrated into the GRU Technical Archive under the designation Namibia Set 4. The translator's annotations, preserved in faint pencil, indicate uncertainty about original terminology. Terms such as resonant lattice, frequency containment, and core stabilization field appear interchangeably, suggesting inconsistent vocabulary among Western sources. A memorandum dated May 9, 1963 from Dr. Weiss to the Pretoria Defense Scientific Advisory Council describes the presence of two independent chambers aligned longitudinally, each containing cylindrical housings of composite metal approximating nickel titanium. The document adds that both cylinders were inert but reactive under applied acoustic stimulation, a phrase whose meaning remains indeterminate. Analysis sheets attached to the same bundle report no residual radioactivity beyond background levels. However, a side annotation, possibly by the translator, notes, field distortion detected in compass readings greater than 5 degrees. The South African Oversight Committee ordered all work suspended and requested British technical assistance through the Commonwealth Defence Channel. A cable from the British High Commission in Pretoria dated June 21, 1963 states, subject, Mineral Survey Anomaly, Northern Sector. Request dispatch of engineering liaison, Crown agents, for asset verification. No direct response has survived, but attached carbon fragments mention a Field Office Kalahari, personnel to transit to Windhoek, late July. It appears that in August 1963 a British inspection team reached the site under civilian cover. Their report, compiled by Engineer Officer T. Carson, describes the installation as consisting of a descending shaft with mechanical junctions of unknown alloy and wiring conduits extending horizontally for several meters before ending in collapse. The final paragraph of Carson's memorandum reads, "Structural corrosion indicates prolonged exposure to vibration or field stress. The integrity of the core assemblies remains anomalous, absence of power source unexplained." Carson recommended immediate sealing and withdrawal. By November 1963, communication between the German and South African participants had ceased. Weiss's name disappears from local employment rosters. A notice dated December 4, 1963 records his departure to Federal Republic on health grounds. However, a later German customs manifest, dated December 19, lists no such traveler among outgoing personnel. Internal correspondence within the Federal Institute, File GI 14/64, merely notes, Dr. Weiss presumed on extended leave, contact pending. The period 1964 to 1966 is characterized by scattered intercepts and translation drafts. One, labeled Summary of Foreign Press Items, Namibia, compiled in Moscow in April 1965, references persistent radio interference observed by civil aviation routes north of Windhoek. Another fragment, sourced from German trade journals, mentions experimental deep earth monitoring equipment supplied to Pretoria. No link is established in official annotations, but both items appear in the same microfilm reel as the Null Horizon material. An internal Namibian police circular from February 2, 1965, copy translated from Afrikaans, reports unauthorized excavation activity near the sealed Utjitual perimeter. The patrol found burn marks on sand surface, metallic debris fused into quartz. Laboratory remarks appended in English describe vitrification similar to that observed in controlled induction melt. The report ends with the statement, source of heat unknown, duration short. No arrests were recorded. Later that year, an unsigned intelligence note summarized regional rumors among mining contractors, local talk of underground generator or British tunnel. The same note includes a hand-drawn map of the area with 3 X marks labeled N1, N2, N3. Only N1 corresponds to the original site coordinates, the others lie within 40 kilometers radius, suggesting secondary shafts. Between late 1965 and early 1966, the British liaison presence in Windhoek diminished. Surviving cables refer to termination of geological contract assets and archival transfer to Pretoria vaults. One final message, stamped March 3, 1966, mentions completion of null horizon containment. The term null horizon appears for the first time in lowercase, implying operational codename adoption. After that, the phrase recurs throughout subsequent translations, sometimes rendered in German as Nullhorizont or in Russian transliteration. Evidence of renewed attention appears only in 1968, when the East German embassy in Lusaka forwarded 2 photographic negatives to Moscow, accompanied by a short explanatory cable, subject possibly identical to pre-1963 installations, location SWA border region. Refer to earlier file NH62. The photographs, later copied into GRU film roll 17A, show partially collapsed metallic framing protruding from desert terrain, consistent with earlier descriptions. The accompanying text from the embassy's scientific attaché, translated into Russian, states, local accounts claim recurring hum beneath the dunes during night hours. Instruments register low-frequency oscillation 14 to 16 Hz without source. Civil authorities uninterested. Civil authorities uninterested. An attached English-language clipping from the Windhoek Advertiser, April 27, 1968, mentions ground tremors and lights on the horizon, attributing them to mining operations. An internal Soviet analysis note dated June 12, 1968 concludes, available data insufficient for correlation. Phenomenon likely of mechanical origin. However, an additional marginal note in blue ink, unsigned, possibly by the translator, adds, terminology identical with Weiss's 1962 log, resonance constant, unassigned amplitude. At roughly this time, several names from the earlier files reappear in peripheral documents. L. Adebayo, previously listed as Weiss's assistant, was recorded in a 1969 personnel register of a Nigerian hydrosurvey mission contracted in Windhoek. The entry ends with, deceased August 12, 1969, cause undetermined. No death certificate accompanies the record. V. Kruger is mentioned in a 1970 Federal Republic telephone directory, annotated in pencil, address invalid. In mid-1971, a memorandum from the Soviet Academy of Sciences Committee on Geophysics, reference G117/71, requested permission to review archival Western reports relating to anomalous subsurface resonance. The authorization, granted under Project Baltic 6, resulted in the assembly of a composite file of translated Western documents, among them several null horizon fragments. The compiler, unnamed, organized them chronologically and inserted short translators' comments between pages. These marginal notes are the only surviving trace of the individual later identified as the probable source of the dossier now under review. The handwriting suggests multiple revisions, with careful erasures, but consistent use of the same graphite type, implying prolonged single-person authorship. One annotation, beside the phrase "energy cores intact," reads simply, "not energy, containment." Another, beside "field distortion detected in compass readings," states, "possible rotating lattice int." Reference. Cross-check with Kamchatka file D59. There is no known Kamchatka D59 file in existing archives. The same compiled bundle includes an unsigned English note, apparently a transcription of a field recording. Weiss maintains the system reacts to acoustic prompting. Suggests cessation until configuration understood. Chamber B vibrates at subaudible frequency, personnel experience vertigo. One technician collapsed. No date accompanies the transcript, but the tone corresponds to 1963 materials. By 1972, the translated dossier shows increasing fragmentation. Pages are numbered irregularly, sequential continuity fails after page 47. The translator's notations shift from German to Russian without clear transition. Several times the phrase, "original unreadable," replaces text, implying deterioration of source documents. Still, the narrative can be reconstructed in outline. In early 1972, a multinational geological consortium resumed limited exploration under new management, ostensibly for uranium prospecting. Among subcontracted personnel were former members of the 1963 mission. Internal South African memoranda identify the project as Namib Subsurface Program 4. Field reports mention reuse of older shafts, previously sealed for safety. A technical dispatch dated May 11, 1972 from Engineer Supervisor H. L. Meyer includes the statement, "Excavation at Sector A reached metallic layer identical to 1963 structure. Attempted sampling unsuccessful, material resists thermal cutter." Later paragraphs note unexpected magnetometer fluctuation and repeated instrument failure near the lower access corridor. Meyer concludes with, "Recommends suspension pending further instruction." In June 1972, the installation was again sealed. 2 weeks later, one of the field trucks was found abandoned 50 kilometers south, engine running, driver missing. Local police report, number 431/72, records, "No struggle, footprints erased by wind." Attached technical annex lists damaged measuring equipment emitting residual static charge. In the same year, diplomatic communications between Bonn and Pretoria mention the disappearance of Dr. K. H. Weiss, presumed deceased. A German consular telegram dated August 2, 1972 states, "Request confirmation of identity and location of remains." Pretoria's reply on August 9, "Individual not located, presumed missing in desert since July 29. This exchange marks the final verifiable reference to Weiss. The surviving Soviet translation concludes the 1972 section with the remark, "Western sources closed file without explanation." Thereafter, documents are sparse, consisting mostly of cross-references and partial translations of South African defense documents labeled Energy Storage Testing, Restricted. None mention the original site by name. By 1973, the compiler's annotations adopt a more systematic tone, referencing external files and analytical comparisons. For example, parallel to Polish file P43, Cowrie resonance study. Distortion identical within 1.2% tolerance. Another note adjacent to a paragraph about site sealing reads, containment procedure repeated 3 times, term null horizon retained for each phase. In early 1974, an East German trade delegation visiting Windhoek under the pretext of industrial consultation submitted a separate internal report marked, confidential, scientific. The report, transmitted via diplomatic pouch, summarized conversations with local technicians formerly employed at mining sites. One witness, unnamed, claimed the existence of metal hulls under sand with humming sound even when sealed. Another described British signs painted on interior doors, later overpainted. The delegation considered these statements unreliable but forwarded them for completeness. An analytical addendum prepared in Berlin concluded, if such structures predate 1945, they may derive from wartime British or German experimental storage. If post-war, origin indeterminate. The margin bears a later Soviet pencil notation. Compare with Project Wind Scale Terminologies 1952-53. In November 1974, final references to the case appear in the Moscow Translation Ledger. The closing annotation reads, Operational correlation incomplete, suggest archiving under technical anomalies, Africa sector. Following this note, the file designation changes from null horizon to NH75. A brief summary typed beneath states, subject inactive, probable natural phenomenon. No further action. However, one additional fragment dated March 1975 contradicts this closure. It is a short telex transcription originating from Lusaka and directed to an unlisted recipient, translated from English by the same hand. Low-frequency pulses again recorded near Ajituo coordinates. Duration 15 minutes. No aircraft or seismic events registered. Suggest re-evaluation of containment integrity. The translation ends with the phrase, transmission incomplete, line cut. A subsequent marginal remark in the archivist's hand, faint but legible under magnification, notes, final contact with source W lost same date. The identity of source W is unspecified. In January 1975, several cables of uncertain origin reached the communications center of the Namibian Territorial Administration at Windhoek. Their headings identified the sender as Hydro Survey Section B, but no such department formally existed. According to a later British communication log, the messages were received in distorted Morse code and contained numerical sequences corresponding to geographic coordinates east of Ajituo, the same area sealed 12 years earlier. The decrypted version, reconstructed by the Pretoria Defense Signal Unit, read, pulse renewed /0 horizon stable /reactor 2 dormant. 2 days later, on January 4, a South African reconnaissance team was dispatched under instruction from the Ministry of Public Works. The official justification cited routine verification of meteorological sensors. Field diary entries recovered later describe extreme compass deviation and intermittent vibration under vehicle chassis while approaching the site perimeter. The officer commanding, Lieutenant C. Van Niekerk, recorded in his notebook, now held in partial photocopy, ground hum persists after engine off. Source undefined. Personnel uneasy. The note ends abruptly with signal loss at 1,600 hours. The last page of the diary is blank, except for a penciled numeral, 2, in the upper right corner. By January 9, Windhoek authorities reported the patrol overdue. A helicopter search located 2 vehicles abandoned near a dry basin. One contained burned equipment, the other was intact but empty. Photographs attached to the recovery report, later included in Soviet microfilm 17C, show tire marks ending sharply, as if erased. Laboratory annotation on reverse, no biological residue found, metallic surfaces magnetized to 0.06 Tesla. The South African police opened an internal file under the designation Felt Incident January 75, classified restricted defense. 3 weeks later, an addendum from the Department of Mines requested access to the recovered equipment, citing possible contamination of geological instruments. Among the listed items were 2 portable seismographs, a battery case melted along its edge, and 1 small lead-lined container labeled in English, Course Sample B. No contents were registered. In March 1975, a German trade attaché in Pretoria reported unofficial rumors of renewed British presence in Windhoek region. The dispatch, forwarded via Bonn to East Berlin and intercepted through ordinary diplomatic monitoring, mentioned that a senior engineer formerly with Crown agents had been recalled to consult on containment protocols relating to a pre-independence installation. This phrase, containment protocols, was underlined by the East German analyst and later by the Soviet translator, who added the marginal note, correlates with 1963 sealing. A subsequent British Foreign Office telegram, reference FO 14/2327, confirms that Engineer Officer T. Carson, the same who inspected the site in 1963, departed for South Africa on March 19, 1975, officially attached to Mining Advisory Group. The file adds, destination, Windhoek, security clearance level C. No return record exists. According to South African Defence Force documents translated in 1978, Carson and 2 local engineers reopened access to the Ajitsuo substructure on April 2, 1975. Their progress reports, preserved only as fragments, describe air temperature of 14 degrees Celsius, faint vibration, and a residual ozone odor identical to early observations. They also mention minor luminescence in metallic surfaces under torchlight. One line, partially erased but legible under infrared scan, states, Core 2 appears active again, hum constant. On April 4, 1975, transmission from the field ceased. 2 days later, a rescue detachment recovered only abandoned tools. In a briefing memo to the Pretoria Chief of Engineers, the commanding officer summarized, sublevel collapsed, access lost. Recommend total infill. Attached technical drawing shows cross-hatched areas marked void. No human remains documented. A second memorandum, dated April 16, 1975, carries the title Null Horizon, Final Containment. Its concluding line reads, Operation complete, area sealed to 8 meters, instruments inactive. The typewriter ribbon used produced uneven imprint, however. Beneath the final word inactive appears faint carbon impression of an earlier draft reading unstable. In parallel, Soviet intercept archives contain a separate cable from Windhoek, English, cipher group CL5, forwarded by a source G. Translation: Unscheduled mining detonation East Sector. Local population reports light and tremor. Military units restrict access. The archivist's comment beside it, chronologically identical with Operation Null Horizon Closure, verify. From May to July 1975, scattered fragments in both Western and Soviet files attempt to consolidate the case. A handwritten German summary titled Abschlussnotiz Weiss Project NH, closing note Weiss Project NH, surfaces within Federal Archives Bonn. It recapitulates that all known technical materials, specimens, and reports have been returned to originating agencies. The note's final sentence, translated into Russian, reads, "No reproducible phenomenon could be demonstrated, apparatus destroyed." Yet chemical analysis forms attached to the same bundle list trace compounds of nickel, titanium, and beryllium, an unusual combination for contemporary alloys. In the Soviet-compiled translation, a small marginal mark appears beside beryllium, with the remark, "Possible shielding element, cf. Karelia Experiment 1959. No such experiment file has been declassified. By September 1975, internal East German correspondence between the main Directorate for Science and Technology and the State Security Service references Namibia anomaly Nullhorizont. The attached memorandum suggests that materials previously in Western possession may be relocated to Pretoria or Lusaka under joint Anglo-South African custody. It further proposes discrete acquisition of technical residue via commercial intermediaries. There is no evidence that such acquisition occurred, but the translator's notation reads, "Handling passed to Foreign Service, translation terminated." Nevertheless, 3 additional documents post-date this termination notice, all in the same typewriter font and signed only with initials, E.V. Their origin remains undetermined. The first is a 1-page English memorandum titled Field Note NH/12, stating, "Resonance persists even after fill, subsurface field detectable by magnetometer. Recommend periodic monitoring." The second, shorter note reads, "Personnel exposed to low-frequency vibration report dizziness, nausea. Duration proportional to proximity." The third document, a partial telex dated November 11, 1975, contains the line, "Containment breached, unknown interference, evacuation ordered. Transmission ceases mid-sentence." All 3 papers were microfilmed in Moscow under Namibia Set 4, addendum and catalogued by the archivist translator without comment, except for a final pencil annotation on the inside cover, "End of file confirmed, sources exhausted." The remaining portion of the dossier, reconstructed from loose pages found in 1983 within an unrelated chemical industry file, appears to be the archivist's post-factum synthesis compiled for internal circulation. The tone shifts toward procedural summary. Between 1962 and 1975, multiple Western field groups engaged in the exploration of subsurface anomalies within the Namibian interior. Despite differing national designations, all refer to identical coordinates. Observed phenomena include persistent electromagnetic oscillation, unexplained magnetization, and physiological discomfort among personnel. Physical remnants consist of metallic structures of indeterminate alloy showing resistance to corrosion and heat. No continuous energy emission detected, however, interference with navigational equipment documented in each phase. Following 1975 containment, no further access permitted. Probability of residual underground mechanism remains unverified. The controlling agencies in Pretoria and London have retained classification above secret. Below the typed passage stands a handwritten sentence in Russian, subject terminated, retention advised pending comparison with other hemisphere records. The archivist's translation ledger concludes with one final record dated December 1975. The entry lists file NH-75, storage location, Sector 7, Box 31, and remarks, originals destroyed by order of compiler. Microfilm copy retained. A diagonal red pencil / crosses the page. This administrative notation is the last verifiable element within the 1962 to 1975 sequence. Subsequent Soviet archival inventories, post-1976, make no mention of null horizon. Only later cross-references within the 1980s, technical anomalies, catalog identify NH as closed African resonance case, details missing. The translated material ends mid-sentence. Beneath the truncated line, in faint pencil, the archivist added, no additional correspondence received. Personal verification impossible. The phrase personal verification appears nowhere else in the dossier. In early 1976, the Registry of the Main Directorate for External Technical Intelligence received several envelopes from the East Berlin archive marked retained duplicates. The attached inventory identified them as secondary carbon copies, provenance uncertain, period 1973 to 1975, subject possibly identical to null horizon. Each envelope contained thin onion-skin sheets typed in English, interspersed with German marginalia and the seal of a now-defunct Pretoria engineering contractor, Rutherford and Lane Ltd. The opening page bore the heading Preliminary Energy Field Observations, Sector B, Ajitsuo Zone, dated March 14, 1973. The text outlined oscillating magnetic resonance confined to limited substrata, noting that measured amplitude fluctuates in cycles consistent with artificial modulation. Under the remarks column appeared the line. Suggest reassessment of earlier British readings, frequency stability suggests powered containment still functional. The translation note beneath reads, repetition of containment term, CNH 63/75 usage. A second document, dated May 5, 1973, lists personnel performing magnetic survey. Three names are partially legible: Carson, Meyer, Kruger. The same Kruger previously recorded as Weiss's technician in 1962. His appearance in a 1973 register, 10 years after his disappearance from German records, contradicts the assumption of his death. A marginal annotation in Russian, probably by the translator, remarks, identity uncertain, check handwriting sample. Attached to this survey report are 3 hand-drawn diagrams depicting curved field lines converging toward a shaded oval marked cavity 2. A German caption added later, Mögliche Resonanzquelle, possible resonance source. Beneath the figures, a typed comment in English reads, field persists when instruments deactivated, suggest non-electrical origin. In August 1976, the Soviet embassy in Lusaka forwarded to Moscow a small sealed parcel labeled "Technical Specimen, Geological Origin." The accompanying letter from the trade representative states, "Material provided by local intermediary formerly attached to mining operation near Grootfontein. Said to originate from underground structure of unspecified date." The enclosed object, later catalogued as Sample 17N, consisted of a metallic fragment approximately 4 cm in diameter, pale gray, non-ferrous, displaying faint internal lamination. Metallurgical examination at the Institute for Non-Ferrous Metals, Moscow, found composition 81% nickel, 11% titanium, trace beryllium. Hardness exceeded 9 Mohs, melting point undetermined. The Institute's summary dated September 22, 1976 concludes, "Unknown manufacturing process, no comparable alloy in current reference tables." The laboratory record includes a footnote referencing the older Namibian documents. Specimen may relate to alleged energy core, described 1963 to 1964. Recommend classification Group 4, Foreign Technological Residue. The translator's notation in margin, same elements as Weiss Report, 1962. Material possibly identical. During late 1976, intelligence liaison correspondence between the Soviet and East German scientific units reflects renewed analytic interest. A meeting summary dated November 11, 1976 notes, "Compare Namibian field resonance with anomalies detected in Tian Shan, File 889/76. Frequency bands overlap within 3%. Cause of similarity unexplained." The conclusion: continue monitoring of radio frequency noise within 10 to 20 Hz range. Potential technological correlation not excluded. In the same folder, a typewritten page labeled Translation Comment, unverified source contains the following observation. Several Western cables employ identical phrasing: reactor 2 dormant, resonance stable, null horizon holding. Context implies control, not observation. No author or agency identification accompanies this note. Only the archivist's marginal reference number NH1276. The following year, in February 1977, a South African Air Force meteorological flight reported compass malfunction while overflying the Atjitruo sector. Crew debrief records, obtained through open broadcast intercept, indicate magnetic deviation up to 40 degrees, followed by temporary loss of radio contact lasting 17 minutes. Upon return, instruments functioned normally. Official explanation: electrical storm interference. Meteorological data for that day show clear skies. The Soviet translation of the flight debrief carries the annotation: field anomaly persists despite sealing operations, CFNH 75. Another pencil remark at bottom of page: possible subsurface emission window reopening. Between May and October 1977, fragments of correspondence trace attempts by British and South African agencies to coordinate technical cleanup. One letter from the Pretoria Ministry of Mines, dated May 19, requests removal of remaining experimental debris to secure disposal facility. A handwritten postscript adds, "Carson deceased, records incomplete." Attached certificate of death gives cause as cardiac arrest, Windhoek, May 1977. No autopsy attached. A parallel British memorandum of June 14, 1977, Foreign Office, Science Division, states, closure of Operation Null Horizon confirmed. All active components neutralized. No further risk. However, typed across the bottom margin in lighter ink appears the note, field persistence unresolved. The Soviet translator underlined this phrase and added comment, contradiction to summary. Another relevant group of papers, dated late 1977, was discovered in a dismantled East German diplomatic pouch stored in Dresden. Label, Private Correspondence, Engineering Consultancy Pretoria. The letters, all unsigned, appear addressed to an individual referred to only as E. Each sheet begins with Dear E, followed by technical remarks on field measurements and containment degradation. One paragraph states, outer perimeter filled again but resonance returns through substrate, cannot maintain null boundary. A later letter concludes, Weiss predicted reactivation, no one listened. Second core may lie deeper. The date stamp, October 3, 1977, postdates Weiss's official disappearance by 5 years. The Soviet translator's side note, authenticity uncertain, paper and ink consistent with South African origin. A new classification line appears at the bottom of the 1977 Soviet Digest, Group NH/Subcontainment Revisions. It is followed by a concise abstract. Earlier assumption of total collapse unreliable. Residual magnetic and acoustic phenomena suggest continuing subsurface process independent of external input. Origin of energy unknown. No official Western disclosure. Recommend indefinite observation through indirect channels. The archivist translator's pencil mark alongside, observation transferred to Science Sector V, no further reports. In early 1978, internal correspondence of the Institute for Applied Geophysics, Moscow, mentions Namibian low-frequency sample series received via GDR. The technical note February 27, 1978 states, signal reproduced artificially under laboratory conditions, frequency 15.8 Hz, waveform consistent with mechanical resonance of hollow metallic chamber. Sample replicates field characteristics at 1:3 scale. Energy input required minimal. The experiment concluded with equipment failure attributed to self-oscillation runaway. Lab technicians reported auditory discomfort and nausea during test, no long-term effects recorded. A margin annotation by the section head, possible psychoacoustic interference, terminate. The same month, the translation department compiled its Null Horizon Supplement A summarizing the preceding data. Paragraph 6 reads, correlation between field phenomena and alloy structure indicates engineered interaction. Presumed original purpose uncertain, containment/generation/measurement. Absence of documentation precludes classification as weapon system. Paragraph 9, presence of constant frequency at 15 to 16 Hz reproduced independently suggests residual auto-tuning process within enclosed metallic framework. Duration of effect exceeds recorded operation period by greater than 10 years. The archivist translator appended a short-hand note below, duration implies feedback mechanism. Refer to defunct file D59, Kamchatka. On May 29, 1978, a communication from the East German trade attaché in Pretoria to Berlin reports the death of an unnamed German technician formerly associated with the Ajichuo project. The local death certificate lists cause as cerebral hemorrhage during sleep. The attaché-S cable includes unofficial comment. Circumstances coincide with ground tremor night 26 to 27 May. Police recorded vibration 16 Hz, duration 12 minutes. This frequency matches previous measurements. The Soviet archive translation of the cable contains 2 additional pencil lines, clearly by the same translator archivist who compiled earlier files, correlation statistically improbable. Pattern repeated. No elaboration provided. During June-July 1978, the internal Soviet correspondence chain concerning NH diminishes sharply. The final technical entry, file N/78-3, records that sample 17N was transferred from laboratory custody to a secure container facility in Podolsk for indefinite storage. Status note, stable, no emission. A red ink warning stamped beneath, do not reheat. After this entry, the microfilm roll concludes with administrative cover sheet, null horizon, terminated per Directive 12 of 78. All translations filed under closed anomalies. Yet an additional slip of plain paper, unnumbered, follows the cover. In faint typewritten English, single line only, field still audible under sand, reporting further may endanger clearance. No signature. In September 1978, the main GRU archival inventory registered receipt of 1 reel labeled NH resonance, Lusaka source. The reel contained audio recording of unknown origin, dated August 1978, consisting of continuous low-frequency hum lasting 14 minutes 37 seconds, amplitude variable. Background noise suggests outdoor environment. Metadata label, recorded 50 kilometers east of Otjichuo per unverified source. Laboratory analysis described waveform as consistent with amplitude-modulated mechanical vibration, 16.1 Hz. No human voice detected. The analytic summary added, signal identical within tolerance to laboratory reproduction, see Applied Geophysics 1978. Possible environmental coupling between subsurface alloy and natural resonance. A secondary note, cannot exclude artificial origin. The real box bears pencil initials of the translator, the same abbreviated hand E.V. This repetition links the individual to prior addenda of 1975, implying continued access despite official termination. A final composite memorandum dated December 1978 summarizes all Western references known at that time. From 1962 to 1975 inclusive, activities in the Otjichuo region involved personnel from Federal Republic of Germany, Union of South Africa, and United Kingdom. Objects of investigation, metallic underground structures exhibiting unexplained electromagnetic characteristics. Following 1975 containment, field activity reportedly ceased but intermittent reoccurrence continues through 1978. All known technical records fragmentary. Central figure Dr. Karl Heinrich Weiss, missing, presumed dead. Causal mechanism undetermined. Beneath the typed conclusion appears faint handwriting, identical graphite to prior annotations, not ceased, stabilized. The final pages of the 1978 microfilm include fragments that deviate from formal summary. A paragraph titled Translator's Observation, Draft, Not for Distribution, reads: terminology differences between German, English, and Afrikaans sources conceal shared assumption, that the structure is not a generator but a regulator. Purpose may involve neutralizing an environmental or artificial oscillation rather than producing it. Loss of personnel in 1975 possibly due to exposure during restabilization. An administrative stamp overlays this text, delete before archive. However, the microfilm image preserves it. A last pencil line in margin, evidence sufficient to imply persistent mechanism greater than 10 years post-closure. Further analysis prohibited by directive. Below, on the reverse of the same sheet, faint handwritten note almost erased by pressure, translator witnessed sample resonance, vibration continued after power removal. No subsequent mention of this statement occurs elsewhere in the archive. The surviving portion of the record for 1979 begins with an interoffice memorandum of the East German Ministry for State Security, dated January 12, 1979, subject line, Überprüfung Namibia Dossiers, NH. The content states only, verify whether translator, EV, remains authorized for scientific correspondence. A rubber stamp below, access suspended January 15, 1979, pending clearance renewal. No follow-up entry exists. A week later, the Soviet liaison section notes in its own margin, translator disappeared en route to Berlin. The comment appears twice in different handwriting, indicating duplication of the same cable through two channels. No missing person file corresponds to this event in later inventories, suggesting unofficial removal rather than formal loss. Among the last chronological inserts is a small packet labeled Achichuo, Revisit, March 1979, report via Lusaka. It contains 6 pages of unevenly typed English text, carbon copy, with header Namibia Remote Field Survey, Contract Essay 73/79. The leading paragraph describes a post-containment evaluation of subsurface metallic anomalies. Observations: ground stable, vegetation returned. Magnetic readings nominal except Sector C. The following lines report localized hum detectable below 20 Hz at dawn and dusk. Instrument type unspecified. Under Personnel, 2 initials listed, MK and DV. The coincidence of initials with the missing translator led later archivists to annotate in Russian, identity uncertain, compare with translation staff list. No comparison sheet found. Page 3 of the same packet carries a hand-drawn topographic sketch. A dark ellipse marks an area labeled collapsed shaft. In the margin appears faint handwriting in German, entry point shifted 12 m west. The Soviet translation note reads simply, structural migration, confirm. The subsequent entry, dated April 1979, summarizes a telegram chain from Windhoek to Pretoria. Unscheduled tremor registered 16 Hz, duration 14 minutes, amplitude +++. Residents report subterranean noise, like engine underground. Geological agency denies seismic origin. This telegram was intercepted by East German listening post, Delta 3, Lusaka sector. Their accompanying translation, forwarded to Moscow, carries the annotation, resonance identical to previous years, probable reactivation. The intelligence evaluation file includes a remark by the chief analyst, unconfirmed field source, 16 Hz corresponds to unclassified mechanical frequency, industrial. However, consistent repetition since 1962 unexplained. Below, in pencil, appears the final surviving annotation by the translator, identifiable by handwriting comparison, witnessed sound at 0500 hours. Not industrial. Between May and July 1979, correspondence from East Berlin to Moscow references audio documents pending transfer. The attached inventory lists Real NHB, Ajituo, Real NHC, Pretoria Broadcast, and Real NHD, Laboratory Copy. All are marked Degraded, Partial Magnetic Loss. Real NHB is accompanied by a short typed summary, field recording captured by local intermediary using magnetic cassette. Contains steady tone at 16.2 Hz, duration 9 minutes 30 seconds, overlaid by intermittent clicking, likely wind. Laboratory comment, frequency identical to 1978 sample. No explanation for persistence provided. Real NHC reportedly contains faint human speech, fragmentary, English accented, phrases, core still live, and pressure builds. Signal quality too poor for authentication. Transcript filed under NHC/trans1, with note, possibly interference pattern misinterpreted as words. The archivist's translation margin, in smaller type, adds, phonetic pattern repeat every 6.4 seconds, mechanical cycle, not human. In August 1979, the Soviet Technical Committee for External Anomalies drafted Directive No. 1479, cease all processing of Operation Null Horizon materials, transfer microfilms to Closed Fund 5. Attached explanatory note, subject lacks strategic or scientific value. Continue passive monitoring only. The signature line blank, stamped, approved August 17, 1979. However, inserted between this directive and the final index page is an unnumbered sheet, typewritten in uneven alignment, evidently from different machine, headed supplement/translator's technical addendum, not circulated. The text reads: Recent inspection of sample 17N, Podolsk facility, produced unexpected response to low-frequency acoustic stimulation, 15 to 17 Hz. Sample emitted synchronized vibration continuing for 43 seconds after input cessation. Amplitude decreasing logarithmically. Surface temperature unchanged. Phenomenon witnessed by 2 assistants. Recording incomplete due to tape malfunction. Below, handwritten note, filed unofficially, retain until further clarification. Initials, EV. The last verified dated entry in the Operation Null Horizon file is September 30, 1979. It is a translation certification sheet confirming closure of foreign language materials. The translator signature field is empty. Instead, a rubber stamp states, personnel reassigned. Microfilm index following this certification lists addendum NHN/Weiss chronology. Frames 001017 consist of biographical reconstruction compiled from Western sources, birth 1911 Heidelberg, physicist, wartime service in Luftwaffe Technical Unit, 1956 relocation to Windhoek, 1962 recorded as head of field project. Final line, 1972, missing, presumed deceased. Frame 018 shows photograph of metallic fragment labeled sample 17N. Frame 019, aerial photograph of Ajituo sector, date unknown. Frame 020, blank. Frame 021, text fragment, in English, light type, boundary hold / pressure stable / null within limits. After frame 021, the film contains 9 seconds of dark leader followed by several frames of static light patterns resembling overexposed microcopy. Soundtrack absent. The Soviet archivist's descriptive note attached in 1980 states, "No additional frames beyond 021. Film ends abruptly. Reason unknown." In the subsequent Overall Registry Review, 1981, the Operation Null Horizon entry is officially listed as inactive, awaiting disposal. Margin annotation in the 1983 update, retain indefinitely / possible comparative value. No technical justification attached. A separate envelope stored with the film carries the label Translator's Personal Notebook, EV, recovered Berlin 1980. The contents, 28 pages, small squared paper, mostly numerical entries. First 12 pages list frequency values, 15.8 to 16.3 Hz, followed by amplitude ratios. Later pages contain short English phrases, hum under floor / sample restless / containment not perfect. Page 23 shows rough sketch of a cylindrical object bisected by concentric rings. Caption, core, still adjusting. Page 27, if null fails, oscillation resumes outward. Final page blank except for faint impression visible under oblique light, recording continues even when tape off. No further reference to this notebook exists in later archives. The inventory card simply states, transferred to Fund 5, Box 113, sealed. In 1982, an internal memorandum of the Soviet Geophysical Service briefly mentions residual resonance from Ajichuo area picked up by automated seismic array K7. Data, frequency 16.1 Hz, duration 11 minutes. Source coordinates correspond within 0.3 degrees to historical site. Report conclusion, artificial cause not excluded, repeat measurement failed. The copy of this report in the closed Fund 5 microfilm bears faint marginal addition, ink different shade, same slanted handwriting as earlier translator notes, NH field still operational, self-correcting. No one in the reviewing committee acknowledged this addition. It remains on film print to this day. Archival summary, compiled 1984. Issued by Central State Archive of Scientific Technical Documentation, translated from Russian. Operation Null Horizon comprised a sequence of unverified investigations, 1962 to 1975, into alleged subsurface electromagnetic anomalies in Namibia. All related personnel presumed deceased or untraceable. Foreign documents suggest technological structure of non-conventional type, Soviet examination inconclusive. No further data after 1979. Case closed. Handwritten below, different ink, signal intermittently detected 1981 to 1983. Classification remains secret. Undated fragment, found loose, provenance uncertain. The microfilm ends with a short typescript, half-page, carbon faded, headed only, note for record. The text. Residual field audible again through sand. Measured 16.0 Hz, alloy sample still active in storage / resonance decays slower each year. Translator's observation, hum no longer external, appears internal. A faint pencil annotation beneath, Original observer untraceable. Post-archive comment, compiler unknown, c. 1986. Following closure of the dossier, no attempt made to re-examine Podolsk material. Laboratory register lists container 17N still sealed. Audio monitoring station array K7 decommissioned. Files retained for reference only. Typed at the bottom, no technical anomaly recorded since. Then, below in smaller type, almost invisible, except hum. End of operation Null Horizon dossier. Translated from mixed English/German sources, 1962 to 1979, compiled Soviet translation 1976 to 1978, declassified 1986, transcription prepared for archival reference use only.